My name is Anya, and the first thing I remember of this life is the scent of betrayal, thick and cloying like rotting fruit. It was the smell of my husband, Leo Vance, standing in our small living room, his face a mask of pained righteousness. "Anya, you have to understand," he said, his voice a carefully calibrated instrument of guilt. "The bandits, when you were saving those people, you ended up pregnant. It's the only excuse that makes sense." His eyes, the color of a placid lake I once thought beautiful, settled on me, full of a disappointment I had spent a lifetime swallowing. I stared blankly not at him but at the ghost of my past self, the one who had accepted this very lie. That Anya had nodded, her spirit broken, and taken the mantle of the village whore so that Leo, the respected teacher, could keep his reputation spotless. In my previous life I had believed his lies. I became the shame of our small village of Oakhaven, the ungrateful woman who betrayed the kindness of the noble Mr. Vance. When his mistress Clara had bullied me to the brink of collapse, no one offered a hand. When the famine came, Leo left with Clara, tossing a single command over his shoulder: "Guard the house." And I did. For 2 years I guarded a hollow shell of a home, not knowing what secret it held. When the new factions stormed in, demanding a map, I was ignorant. Their fists were not. They beat me until the world in my left eye went forever dark. Later I learned the map had been hidden in our well the entire time. The credit for safeguarding it went to Leo and Clara, the brave, devoted couple. They won opportunities, a life in the city. They burned the university admission letter that was my only escape. "Your mother is bedridden," Leo had told me, his voice final. "If you leave, who will take care of her?" So I stayed, nameless and trapped, my life wasted in service to a man who saw me as nothing more than a beast of burden. Now, standing in the same room with the memories of that wasted lifetime screaming in my mind, I pulled myself together. I looked at Leo's hypocritical face, at the way he held himself with an air of long-suffering patience, and I let a faint, cold smile touch my lips. "Fine," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a shard of glass. "But the grounds for the divorce will be that you betrayed your wife, not that I was unfaithful." The air left the room. Clara, who had been hovering by the door like a specter, instantly put on a pitiful look and hurried forward. "Anya, you know this is the most crucial moment for Leo's promotion. How can rumors like this spread now? Do you want to ruin him?" Leo's brows drew together, his eyes full of reproach. "Why are you always so short-sighted, caring only about your petty interests? How can that compare to Clara, who thinks only of me?" Then my son, the boy I had loved more than my own life, spoke. David, with Leo's eyes and my own heart-shaped face, jabbed a finger at me. "I don't want you as my mom. I want Aunt Clara." He pouted, waiting for me to crumble, to fall to my knees and beg for his forgiveness as I always had. I looked down at this child, the repository of all my past love and suffering, and felt nothing but a vast, hollow coldness. "All right," I said, my tone devoid of emotion. "Then persuade your dad to divorce me. That way you can call her mom. Otherwise, your Aunt Clara will always be the other woman." Leo met my eyes, and for the first time he saw the icy resolve in them. He actually stepped back, startled. He tried to regain control, his voice softening into a false concern. "Anya, after the divorce, where can a woman like you go? All alone?" "Anywhere is better than here," I replied, my gaze unwavering. David, enraged by my indifference, began pounding his small fists against my legs. "Bad mom. I don't want a bad mom." I looked down at his furious little face, so eager to defend the woman who would help destroy him, and I raised my hand. The sound was sharp, definitive. David clutched his cheek, staring at me as if I were a monster. And in a way I was. They had created me. Leo rushed forward, his face a thundercloud. "This is between us. Don't take it out on the child." I lifted my eyes, fixing him with a steady stare. "I can wait for you to decide on the divorce, but your sweetheart's belly might not wait. When Clara starts to show, marrying her will only bring you disgrace." I saw the calculation in his eyes, the frantic weighing of his reputation against his desire. In the end, self-preservation won. He followed me to the marriage registry. The village gossips were out in force. "Wasn't Mr. Vance always the most devoted husband?" they whispered. "How could they be divorcing?" I let the whispers grow. "I heard Mr. Vance has been awfully close to that woman, Clara. If he hadn't cheated, why would Anya have been the one to ask for the divorce?" The gossip grew louder, uglier until Leo finally snapped. "Shut up, all of you," he shouted, his voice cracking with a strain I had never heard before. The crowd fell silent, shocked. A cold laugh escaped me. In my past life I had been the one drowning in this slander, begging him to say a word in my defense. He always told me I was being petty, that if I had nothing to hide, why would people talk? Now it was his turn, and his tolerance had evaporated in an instant. He cast me a venomous glare as if he wished to cut me into pieces, and then he stormed off. When I returned home to pack my things, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. Why delay the wedding? Clara's voice was thick with tears. "Leo, don't you want to marry me anymore?" His tone was laced with impatience. "Everyone's gossiping right now. If we get married, won't it make us look guilty? I'm doing this for your sake. But my belly is already big. Can't we wait just 2 more months? I didn't wait to hear his reply. I went to my room, the one I had shared with him for a decade, and began to pack the few things that were truly mine. When I stepped out, David saw my bag and hurled his bowl to the floor. "Why are you only back now?" His small face was twisted with rage. "I'm starving to death." In the past, I would have rushed to the stove, sweating in the sweltering heat to make him a meal he would inevitably complain about. I lifted my gaze coldly toward Leo. "Don't you have hands? Can't you make it yourself?" Leo, irritable with hunger, slammed a cup to the ground. "Enough. Do you see what time it is? Dinner isn't ready and this whole family is waiting on you. Hurry up and cook." Just as I was about to answer, a low moan sounded from the back room. It was Leo's mother, Helena. In my past life I had devoted myself to her, washing her soiled sheets, spoon-feeding her broth, only to be beaten and cursed in return. The stench of sickness spread through the summer air, foul and suffocating. Everyone's eyes turned to me. Leo's were especially sharp, silently demanding I resume my duties. I curved my lips in a faint smile. "Why are you all looking at me?" "She's your mother." Leo pinched his nose, his voice sharp. "You're her daughter-in-law. Of course this is your duty." I arched a brow, my gaze flicking toward Clara. "Daughter-in-law? That's not me anymore." Clara's face flashed with panic. "Leo, you know a penis hands are the most precious of all. You can't ask me to do this." Leo's brow was knitted tight. He looked from her to me, clearly troubled. His gaze finally settled on me, a threat underlying his words. "If you take on one more duty as a daughter-in-law, you'll suffer one more burden. Are you sure you want to go head-to-head with me?" I stepped aside and sat down, my face calm. "I don't care. It's just summer full of flies and stench. It's not my mother." Clara snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. "How can you be so vicious now? That's your mother-in-law." I arched a brow and parted my lips slightly. "She is your mother-in-law now." The retort left her speechless. She looked at Leo, her face a mask of grievance. He covered his mouth in disdain, but seeing no other option, he finally said, "Fine, Clara, you go then." Clara plastered on a sickly smile. "She's my mother too. There's no way I could beg out." Reluctantly, she stepped into the room. The stench immediately made her gag. I stood to the side and watched as she pinched her nose, picked up a stick and clumsily tried to prod the old woman, jabbing her in the spine. "Ow. I'm dying," Helena wailed. Leo heard the cry and rushed back in, alarmed. Seeing Clara poking his mother with a stick, the usually composed man snapped. "What are you doing?" I watched the scene unfold, a silent spectator to the first crack in their perfect facade. This was only the beginning. The cage was opening, and this time I was the one holding the key. The commotion in the back room escalated into a symphony of dysfunction. Leo's shout, his mother's pained wails, and Clara's defensive whining blended into a noise I had heard too many times in my first life. Only then, the target of the fury had always been me. "You promised you'd protect me." Clara's voice had lost its cultivated gentleness, turning shrill. "You make me do this before we even set foot in our own home. I'm a pianist." Leo's retort was sharp, frayed at the edges by hunger and humiliation. "Pianists don't put food on the table. Besides, aren't women supposed to do this kind of work? Can your piano playing make tonight's dinner?" A grim satisfaction settled in my chest. In my past life, I had been the one to say that playing piano wouldn't grow grain, that she'd be better off working the fields. Leo had chastised me for my lack of refinement, for my inability to fit into polite society. Now he was the one throwing her useless artistry back in her face. Their affection, it seemed, was not as deep as the well they had hidden their secrets in. "You filthy woman," a voice of fury cut through the din. I looked down to see David pointing at me, his face twisted with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. He thought this would break me, that I would fall to my knees, beg for his love, and return to my life of servitude. I simply rubbed my palm, the one that had connected with his cheek. "Apparently," I said, my voice flat, "the last slap wasn't loud enough." David froze, his incredulous eyes wide. "But you used to love me the most," he whispered, a child confronting a fundamental shift in his universe. "Why aren't you consoling me this time?" Leo stepped forward, trying to reassert his authority, to play the magnanimous patriarch. "Anya, enough. I know what you want. I'm not kicking you out. You can stay here in peace. I'll provide you a place to live. Do what you used to do. Just keep doing it." Clara hurried to his side, a vulture sensing a carcass. "In these chaotic times, Brother Leo is giving you a safe home. He isn't throwing you out, and you can't even thank him. So he expected me to remain the unpaid servant, the caregiver, the beast of burden, all while he played house with his pregnant mistress. I had planned to move out to claim my freedom entirely, but since he was so insistent on keeping me under his thumb, I would make him pay for the privilege." I curved my lips into a smile that didn't reach my eyes and pulled out the divorce agreement I had drafted. "The division of property is written clearly here. You're to give me $1,200. Otherwise, half of this house is mine, and you have no right to tell me to leave or to stay." Leo's face purpled. He pointed a trembling finger at me, speechless with rage. David, seeking to land a blow, let out a cold, childish laugh. "Fine. You want money, huh? Then I'll choose Dad. Money or me? Pick one." He stood there, chest puffed out, confident in his power over me. He was the treasure I had cherished above all else. When he had fevers, I had stayed by his bed for 3 days without sleep. When he cried, I had circled him like a frantic bird, terrified of his slightest unhappiness. Now I only glanced at him with utter disdain. "I wasn't planning to take you anyway." The blow landed exactly as I intended. His eyes widened, the confidence shattering into a million pieces of bewildered hurt. "Stop pretending," he cried, his voice cracking. "You always treated me like your treasure. You'd never give me up." "Treasure?" I let my eyes sweep over his small, furious form and chuckled coldly. "How much do you think you're worth? If I'd known I'd give birth to you, I'd have bought a condom instead." The cruelty of the words hung in the air. David had never seen this version of me. Sharp, merciless, and utterly devoid of the gentle indulgence he'd always known. He couldn't process it. Tears, real and shocked, spilled down his cheeks. "You're not my mom. My mom isn't like this." I couldn't be bothered with their theatrics. Turning my back on them, I walked to the stove and started cooking a simple meal, for one. Leo, who had been tense, visibly relaxed when he saw me at the stove. A smug look crossed his face. "See," he said to no one in particular, "after all this talk you're still the same as before." He then wrapped his arm around Clara's waist and led her out of the kitchen, believing he had won. David, sounding like he wanted to carve his revenge into my skin, called out deliberately, "From now on I'll call Aunt Clara Mom. You're the one who wanted the divorce." "Do as you please," I sneered, not turning around. "But don't think it'll last long. Do you really believe once her baby is born, there will still be a place for you here? My dad loves me the most. Stop trying to turn us against each other." He shot back, but his tone was stubborn, the panic in his eyes betraying him. Then he bolted, unable to stand the sight of my impassive back. After I finished eating and cleaning my single bowl, night had fallen. Perhaps because I hadn't called them to dinner as I used to, Leo lost his patience. He barged into my room, the room I now kept locked. "Where's the food?" he demanded, his mouth full of reproach. "Mom's starving." Clara stood behind him, pouting. "Anya, how can you not even handle cooking? How are you supposed to take care of Leo and this family in the future?" I looked straight at her, my voice clear and deliberate. "That's right. I can't take care of it. So from now on, the cooking and laundry will be your responsibility." In my past life, Clara had always maintained her noble, elegant image. Leo had promised her she'd never have to lift a finger, that she could live like a princess forever. Now she panicked. Anya, if you won't take care of us, won't you at least care for your son? Can you bear to see him starve? That useless thing? My voice was flat, uncaring. If he starves, so much the better. Let's see how long you can keep up the act. Leo's eyes turned dark and heavy on me. He saw the absolute finality in my gaze. Without another word, he pulled a stunned Clara with him and left. Not long after, their quarrel began anew. Clara was the pianist, which meant the cooking naturally fell to Leo. But what did a man like him, who had never so much as boiled water for himself, know about cooking? The sounds of clattering pans and frustrated shouts filled the house. He burned his hand, spilled food all over the floor, and after working all day, the whole family was left with nothing to eat. Grumbling and complaints quickly filled the air. David clung to Clara's arm. Dad can't cook. I want Aunt Clara to make food. I watched from my doorway as Clara lowered her eyes to the boy clutching her arm. A flash of pure irritation crossed her face before she forced a smile. All right, sweetheart. I'll go make something for you. It took her an hour, but she finally brought out a bowl of lumpy, poorly cooked noodles. David took one bite, then set his chopsticks down with a dramatic frown. These aren't as good as Mom's. I don't like them. I don't want to eat. Clara drew a deep breath, stretching a stiff smile across her face. Just eat for now. Tomorrow, Auntie will take you to eat something delicious. I don't want that. David burst into tears. Before, Mom would make me something new right away. Enough. Leo looked at him with pure irritation. Be grateful there's food at all. If you won't eat, then go hungry. David had never been scolded like that before. Faced with his father's anger for the first time, he cried even harder and ran off into the growing darkness. As soon as he left, Helena started up again from her room, her voice a reedy demand. I want fish. I want fish stew. In the past, if she wanted something even in the middle of the night, I had to get up and make it. Fish wasn't cheap, and catching them at night was no easy task. Leo pretended not to hear, waiting for Clara to respond. Clara, in turn, acted deaf, ignoring the old woman completely. Helena howled for a long time with no reply, then broke down into ragged, self-pitying sobs. Leo hadn't expected Clara to stay silent the whole time, and his expression turned sour. After a silent, miserable meal of bread, he went straight back to his room without a word. Helena wailed on, and when no one paid her any attention, her voice grew shrill. He's brought a witch into this house. She wants to torture me to death. I want Anya back. Let her come cook for me again. But I had finally escaped. I wasn't about to return. Her voice carried through the summer night, sharp enough to pierce the walls. The whole street, every neighbor heard her. To them it became fact. Leo had abandoned me for Clara, and our divorce was because of her. This time, it was his turn to bear the reputation of a heartless man. I didn't dwell on it. I turned over and went to sleep, the sound of their misery a lullaby of my newfound freedom. In the middle of the night came a pounding on my door. Peering out the window, I saw David's small, forlorn figure. I didn't need to ask to know he was starving and wanted me to cook for him. He was waiting for the old Anya to appear, to fuss over him and whip up a meal with a comforting smile. I pulled the blanket over my head and went right back to sleep. The beast of burden was gone. Let the princess and the nobleman fend for themselves. The next morning I woke with the dawn, a feeling of lightness in my chest that was so foreign it took me a moment to recognize it as peace. The cacophony of the Vance household was now a problem for Clara, not for me. After cooking a simple breakfast for myself, 1 egg, 1 bowl of congee, I headed into the village. The air was fresh, and for the first time in either lifetime, I was walking through Oakhaven without the weight of their expectations crushing my shoulders. Word had spread that a new group of educated youths had arrived from the city. This was a pivotal moment I remembered with crystalline clarity from my past life. It was when I had first met Dr. Daniel Reed. He had been the one to see the person beneath the drudgery, the one who taught me knowledge beyond household chores, who whispered that in the city, women could be more than just wives and mothers, that a failed marriage could end in divorce without eternal damnation. He had planted the first seed of rebellion in me, a seed that, in my first life, Leo and his mother had ruthlessly stomped out. This time I was determined to find that seed and let it grow into a mighty tree. At the village entrance, a small crowd had gathered around a dusty truck. The new arrivals, looking disoriented but bright-eyed, were registering their names. And there he was. Daniel. He wore a simple white t-shirt and khaki work pants, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The sun had already kissed his skin, revealing the faint tracing of veins along his forearms. He looked exactly as I remembered, intelligent, kind, and out of place. Just as in my previous life, he detached himself from the group and came toward me, a hesitant smile on his face. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a warm baritone that felt like a balm. "Could you point me to the quarters for the new arrivals? I think I'm a bit turned around." I pointed down the main path. "The old schoolhouse about half a mile down on the right. They've set up cots there." His smile widened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Thank you. I'm Daniel. Daniel Reed." "Anya," I said, and the name felt like my own for the first time. From there, as if pulled by an invisible thread, we fell into a conversation. It was easy, natural. He spoke of the city, of libraries filled with books, of a world where people argued about ideas instead of gossiping about their neighbors. I listened, not as the ignorant village wife I was supposed to be, but as the student I had always longed to be, my mind soaking up his words like parched earth. When I returned home from the village entrance hours later, the Vance household was in its usual state of disarray. The kitchen table was bare. In the past, it would have been covered with food I had prepared before the sun was even up. Leo sat down at the head of the empty table and glanced at Clara, his expression tight. "You didn't cook?" His voice was sharp, laced with reproach. Clara looked up from where she was meticulously cleaning her nails, her face a picture of blank innocence. "How could I get up this early? I have a piano competition in the county today. You know how important my practice is." "Dad, I'm so hungry," David whined, tugging at Leo's sleeve. His eyes were red-rimmed and he shot a resentful glance toward my room. Leo checked his watch, his face paling. "No time. I've got an important meeting with the inspection team today. Just find something to eat yourselves." He grabbed his bag and rushed toward the door, a man fleeing his own domestic battlefield. The moment he was gone, Helena started her morning wail from the back room. "Food. Someone. I'm wasting away." Clara, thoroughly annoyed, stood up and brushed past David without a second look. "I have to catch the bus," she announced, heading for the door. David trailed after her, a little lost sheep. "Aunt Clara, you promised you'd take me for something tasty yesterday," he reminded her, his voice small. Left with no choice and clearly wanting to get away from the crying old woman, Clara had to take him with her into the county. Helena cried until her voice was hoarse, but no one came. By the time I stepped into the main room to get some water, she was so hungry she had no strength left for anything but weak moans. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with a desperate, pathetic hope. You're finally back," she rasped. "Good child. My good child. Leo was seduced by that vixen. It's good you've come home. Make me a fish. You make it best." I looked at her, this woman who had beaten me with her walking stick for serving soup that was too hot, and felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast empty space where my duty to her used to reside. "It seems you don't like her much," I said slowly, watching her closely. "Why don't you tell Leo to break up with her?" As expected, she hesitated. Her eyes darted away. In my past life, even though she thought Clara was useless and couldn't do a single chore, she still considered her a pianist, a respectable, presentable match for her son. She had always preferred her. That hadn't changed. She couldn't let go of the status Clara represented, even if it meant she herself suffered. Yet she still couldn't let go of the idea of me as her personal slave. "You're still my daughter-in-law in spirit," she wheedled. "Be a good girl and help me." "If you can't let her go," I said, my voice flat, "then you'd better get used to having your proud daughter-in-law cook for you." I ignored her renewed cries and walked out, retreating to my room. After cooking, I always had to clean the dishes, wash clothes, do chores, and take care of Helena. There was never a moment to rest. Now finally I had time. I lay down on my cot, the silence a precious commodity, and slept a deep, untroubled sleep. I was woken by the sound of the front door slamming. Leo was home. He was carrying a bag from the county store, noodles, flatbread, and a small cut of meat. Inspectors from the city were coming, and the officials would surely visit his model home first. His supervisor had clearly told him to bring food to make the place look prosperous and well-managed. As soon as he put the food down, the stench in the house hit him like a physical blow. Helena had soiled herself again. He looked around but Clara was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't stop himself from cursing. The leaders are about to arrive. Where the hell is everyone? With no choice, his face a mask of disgust, he was just about to roll up his sleeves and clean it himself when a firm knock came at the door. My timing was perfect. I stepped out of my room just as the village chief was leading Director Chin and the inspection team inside. Comrade Vance's mother has been bedridden for more than 10 years, the chief was saying, his voice booming with pride. And he has always cared for her diligently, never once slacking. A true model of filial devotion. But the moment they stepped into the house, the foul smell assaulted them. The director and his team recoiled, bringing handkerchiefs to their noses. Leo's face turned a sickly shade of pale green. Director, I just haven't had time yet to change her bedding, he stammered. What do you mean, no time? His mother suddenly roared, finding her strength in her fury and humiliation. Are you trying to torture me to death? You and that witch. Leo tried to shush her to cover her mouth, but it was too late. His face flushed a deep, mortified red. Director Chen's expression soured. Comrade Vance, I was told you were the most filial son in Oakhaven. That's why I approved this one and only promotion slot for you. He gestured around the stinking room. Is this your idea of filial piety? Leo stammered, fumbling for excuses, but the more he spoke, the worse it sounded. His mother, her eyes burning with resentment, sat up as best she could. All his so-called filial devotion. He gives it all to that Mistress Clara. He doesn't care if I live or die. Mother! Leo finally roared, his composure shattering. A strange, knowing light flickered in the director's eyes. The village secretary leaned in and whispered something in his ear, and his face darkened further. Abandoning your wife for a mistress, Director Chin said, his voice cold and final. Comrade Vance, even Chairman Mao spoke against such things. Forget it. With that, he waved a dismissive hand and led his team out of the house. The promotion, the one thing Leo had sacrificed my honor for, was as good as gone. Not long after the leaders left, Clara returned with David, both of them full and satisfied from their outing. Leo, still seething with a rage that had been building for weeks, grabbed a wooden stool and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall. Where the hell were you? He bellowed. Clara jumped in fright and immediately shoved David forward as a human shield. David was hungry. He tugged at me, begging to be taken out to eat. Eat, eat, eat. That's all he ever thinks about. Leo looked at his son, the focus of all his thwarted ambition, and suddenly erupted. You useless boy. David froze, dumbstruck. In the past, whenever he was scolded, I had always stepped in to shield him, to take the blame. This was the first time he'd been shoved forward to bear the brunt of it himself. His lip trembled. It wasn't me, he choked out, tears welling in his eyes. It was Clara. She wanted to go eat at the new restaurant. She said she was tired of this house. At that, Leo paused and turned his venomous gaze to Clara. And where did you get the money for a restaurant? Clara's voice faltered. From the cabinet. The money you put there for the rations. Fury twisted Leo's face. He drew in several deep, shuddering breaths. I told you we had to save. Once we've scraped together enough, I have to give Anya the 1,200. Why should I hand over that much to her? The grievances of many days boiled over in Clara, stripping away the last vestiges of her gentle facade. Do you still have feelings for her? Is that it? She shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Why should I have to scrimp and save to pay off that cow? I can't talk sense with you. Leo turned, ready to storm off, but Clara suddenly laughed, a wild, sharp sound. My belly is already big, she shouted, pointing at her stomach. If you don't marry me soon, I won't be able to hide it. You won't have any peace either. I'll tell everyone myself. The bandits didn't touch me. This child is yours. The crack of Leo's palm across her face echoed through the house. You're insane, he hissed. Clara smiled wildly through the sting of the slap. Crazy? My biggest mistake was betting everything on you. If I'd known, I'd have gone with Director Lee instead. Then go find him now. Leo sneered, his face a mask of contempt. See if he'll still want you now that you're carrying my bastard. They nearly tore the roof off with their fighting. The sound of pots and pans crashing, of screams and curses, filled the house. It was the sound of a foundation built on lies and selfishness crumbling into dust. That very day, Leo went to the village office and returned the extra grain rations he had secured through his position. The reality of their reduced circumstances was setting in. David cried and begged, but Leo didn't even look at him. That night, David came knocking at my door, a soft, hesitant tap. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm hungry." He was waiting for me to open the door, to pull him into a hug, to find some scrap of food and cook it for him with a soothing word. I lay in my bed listening to his quiet sniffles, and I did not move. I did not open the door. After a long while, I heard his footsteps shuffle away empty-handed. Before long, Leo and Clara held their wedding. To call it a wedding was generous. It was a rushed, miserable affair at the registry office, with no celebration, no guests, no joy. Clara was far from satisfied. She cried and raged, but Leo was immovable. On their wedding night, he didn't even share a room with her. Busy with their own chaotic misery, neither Leo nor Clara had any energy left for David. He drifted around the house and the village like an unwanted ghost. Finally, he began to miss the stability I had provided, the unconditional love he had so carelessly discarded. But his pride, a smaller, petiter version of his father's, kept him from yielding. Every day he would pass by my doorway, his steps slowing, pretending it was by accident, waiting for me to call him in, to offer him a piece of fruit, to ask him how his day was. I saw him. I always saw him. But I acted as if he were just part of the furniture, an invisible boy in a house that was no longer my home. The cage was wide open now, and I was learning how to fly. I would not be climbing back in for anyone. The seasons began to turn. The stifling heat of summer gave way to the crisp air of autumn, and with it, a new kind of tension settled over Oak Haven. Whispers became urgent talks, and urgent talks became frantic preparations. Word spread that the new faction was on the march, and their reputation for violence preceded them like a bad wind. In my first life, this had been the period of my blinding, of the final, brutal severing of my ties to any future. I had been the ignorant guardian of a secret that wasn't mine, taking a beating for a map I knew nothing about. This time I was not just aware, I was waiting. My days had fallen into a new rhythm, one centered on my own survival and growth. I spent my mornings in the village library, a dusty, single-room building that had become my sanctuary. Daniel Reed often found me there. Our conversations, which had started with directions and polite introductions, had deepened. He brought me books, not just novels but texts on history, biology, and even some tattered, precious volumes on law. He saw a mind in me yearning to learn, and he fed it without condescension, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's a shame the university entrance exams are suspended," he said to me one afternoon, his finger tracing the spine of a philosophy book. "You have a sharp intellect, Anya. You shouldn't let it go to waste." "In another life, perhaps," I replied, but the seed he planted in my past life was now a determined sapling in this one. I would not let it be stomped out. It was during one of these library sessions that the whispers reached a fever pitch. A boy ran past the open door shouting, "They're a day's march away. They're coming." The village plunged into organized chaos. Families began packing their most valuable possessions, making plans to flee to the hills or to relatives in distant villages. I walked back to the Vance house, my steps steady. It was time. The house was a pit of panicked indecision. Leo was pacing, his face ashen. Clara was wringing her hands, her carefully maintained composure utterly gone. David was clinging to her skirts, his eyes wide with a fear he didn't understand. "With your mother, it'll be too hard to flee," Clara was saying, her voice pitched high with anxiety. "Why don't we just leave her here? We can come back for her." "That's my mother," Leo shouted, but the anger in his voice was weak, performative. I could see the calculation in his eyes. He didn't want the burden either, he just didn't want to be the one to say it. "Cruel. Fine, then you take care of her yourself along the road," Clara snapped, the last of her pretense falling away. She was no longer the refined pianist, but a terrified, pregnant woman fighting for her own survival. Truthfully, Leo didn't want to bring Helena. His protests were just a show, a way to later blame Clara and appear blameless himself. Now that she'd spoken the words aloud, he had the scapegoat he needed. His gaze then fell on me, standing calmly in the doorway, observing their moral collapse. He strode over to me, his expression shifting to one of forced authority. Seeing the small bag I carried, he frowned. "Why are you packing? My mother is still here." Naturally, you'll stay and care for her. This was the moment. This was the leverage I had been waiting for. I looked at him, at the man who had stolen my life, my sight and my future, and I felt a cold, clean power surge through me. If you want me to care for her, I said smoothly, my voice cutting through his bluster, I'll do it. I held out my hand, palm up. The gesture was simple, final. But you'll have to give me the 1,200. Now. The smile that had just begun to flicker across his face, the smile of a man who thought he had regained control over his beast of burden, disappeared at once. He stared at my outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake. Anya, be reasonable, he began, but I cut him off. The money, Leo. Or you can take your mother with you and explain to the new faction why you're fleeing with a paralyzed old woman while your new pregnant wife complains about the hardship. I'm sure they'll find your filial devotion noteworthy. Confronted with the iron resolve in my eyes, the utter lack of the softness he had always exploited, he had no choice. His shoulders slumped in defeat. With trembling hands, thick with resentment, he went to a loose floorboard near the hearth, pried it up and pulled out a thick envelope. He counted out the money, his movements jerky with fury, and slapped the cash into my waiting hand. The weight of it was more than just paper and promise. It was the weight of my stolen years finally repaid. As soon as Leo stepped outside to finalize their pathetic escape plans, Clara immediately descended on him. I could hear their hissed argument from inside. That money is for our journey, she screamed, her voice raw. How could you give it to her? I didn't have a choice. Leo shot back, his voice ragged. She never asked me for money before. I didn't expect her to demand it. If you give it to her, what will we eat? How will we survive in the city? Clara's words dissolved into hysterical sobs. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of your useless family. Shut up. Leo roared, and I heard the sound of a scuffle, a sharp cry, and then silence. Months of endless fights had already worn their relationship to a frayed thread. Whatever affection they once had was long gone, replaced by a bitter, mutual dependency. Watching their backs as they rode off on a rickety cart later that day, Leo, Clara, and a bewildered David, I felt nothing. No triumph, no sorrow. It was simply an ending. A door closing. I finished packing my single bag. Then I turned to Helena's room. The woman who, in my past life, had beaten and cursed me like a dog, was lying in her own filth, her eyes wide with terror. You, she rasped. You have to take me with you. I didn't answer her. I walked to the village nursing home, the poorest, most dismal one, the one she had always sworn she would rather die than enter. I paid the matron 3 months' fees from Leo's money. Helena Vance, I told her. Her son has fled. She has no one. Then I returned, and with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I bundled the shrieking, cursing old woman onto a handcart, wheeled her to the home, and deposited her on the thin cot in the bare room. She had sworn that if anyone dared to send her there, she would rather die. I looked down at her, at the face that had held so much cruelty for me. I hope you do, I said quietly, and then I turned and walked away, her wails following me out into the autumn air. As I walked back to the now silent house, a figure stepped out from the shadow of the old well. Daniel Reed. He had his own small bag slung over his shoulder. The train for the city leaves in an hour, he said. His eyes were serious, but there was a question in them. I'm going. They need doctors. Will you come? In my past life I had hesitated. I had been bound by chains of duty and fear. This time I did not. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a vow. I am. We did not look back. We walked to the station together, and as the train pulled away from Oakhaven, I watched the village that had been my prison shrink into the distance. I was not just fleeing the new faction. I was fleeing the ghost of the woman I had been. Leo and Clara had their stolen map, their desperate hope for a future in the city. I had something better. I had $1,200, a sharp mind, and a future I was going to seize with my own 2 hands. The game was far from over, and this time I held the better cards. The city was a shock to the system, a roaring, sprawling beast of noise and motion that made Oakhaven seem like a forgotten dream. The air tasted of coal dust and possibility. Daniel, true to his word, found us a small, clean room in a boarding house near the hospital where he began his work. It was nothing fancy, but it had a lock on the door and a window that looked out onto a bustling street, not a cage of someone else's making. For the first few weeks I simply existed, learning the rhythms of this new life. I kept our room tidy, learned where to buy the cheapest vegetables, and cooked simple meals for us on the shared stove in the hallway. It was a domesticity I had known my whole life, but this time it was chosen. It was for myself and for a man who saw me as a partner, not a servant. Daniel was a quiet, steady presence. He worked long hours at the hospital, often coming home with the lines of fatigue etched deep on his face, but he always had a smile for me. In the evenings, by the light of a single lamp, he became my teacher. "The exams will come back, Anya," he would say, pushing a textbook on biology toward me. "I can feel it. The country needs educated people. You need to be ready." And so I studied. I devoured the knowledge he brought me. The complex workings of a cell, the sweeping narratives of history, the logical structures of mathematics. They were a different kind of language, one that spoke of a world far beyond the kitchen and the village well. My mind, once dulled by drudgery and despair, awoke with a voracious hunger. I used a small portion of the money to buy myself new clothes. Simple, sturdy trousers and shirts, a far cry from the worn-out dresses of my past life. I walked the city streets with my head held high, no longer Anya the shamed wife, but Anya the student, the city dweller. A year passed in this way. The political winds shifted as they always do. The new faction that had sent Oakhaven into a panic lost its grip on power. And then the news we had been waiting for crackled over the radio and was plastered on every street corner. The National College entrance examinations were being reinstated. The city erupted in a quiet, determined frenzy. Thousands of people, their educations interrupted by years of turmoil, scrambled for books and application forms. Daniel came home that night with a precious bundle, the application materials. "You're doing this," he said, his voice firm, placing them in my hands. I spent the next month in a state of focused intensity the likes of which I had never known. I studied while cooking, I recited historical dates while walking to the market, I fell asleep with mathematical formulas dancing behind my eyelids. The ghost of the university admission letter Leo and Clara had burned in my first life was a constant spur, driving me forward. The day of the exam my hand did not shake. I looked at the paper filled with questions that would have been incomprehensible to the old Anya, and I began to write. I wrote of cell mitosis and classical poetry, of economic principles and chemical equations. I poured every ounce of my hard-won knowledge onto the page. Weeks of agonizing wait followed. Then the letter came. Thick, official, bearing the seal of the university. With trembling fingers I opened it. I had been admitted to the School of Economics. I showed the letter to Daniel. He whooped with joy, picked me up and spun me around in our small room. "I knew it," he laughed. "I always knew it." It was the happiest moment of either of my lives. My new life settled into a blissful routine. I attended lectures during the day, marveling at the grand halls and the passionate professors. I came home to Daniel and we would talk for hours about my classes, his work, our future. We were building something together, something real and solid, brick by careful brick. It was on one such day as I was waiting for Daniel outside the university gates after a late class, that the past decided to pay a visit. I saw them before they saw me. They were a shabby, broken tableau on the bustling city street. Leo and Clara, their clothes worn thin and dirty, their faces gray and etched with a hardship that went deeper than poverty. They looked aged, defeated. And between them, dwarfed by their misery, was David. He was thinner, his eyes large and hollow in his pinched face. The moment they spotted me, panic filled their eyes. I was clean. I was dressed in neat university-issue clothes. I held myself with a confidence they could no longer comprehend. I was living proof of the life they had tried to steal from me. David, however, broke from them and ran toward me, a desperate, hopeful light in his eyes. "Mom," he cried, his voice cracking. "Mom, I don't want Clara. She's not my mom. She bullies me." He thought I would embrace him as before, that I would wipe his tears away with gentle hands and make everything better. He was still the child who believed my love was an infinite resource, one he could squander and then reclaim at will. But this time I only looked at him calmly. The more he cried, the more his words tumbled out in a frantic, pathetic rush. "All the good food at home goes to my little brother. Dad won't let me touch it. I never get enough to eat. Mom, please, please take me with you." He reached for me, his small, grubby hand outstretched. I took a deliberate step back, creating a chasm between us with that single movement. I looked down at him, at the living reminder of my first wasted life. "There is no mom here for you," I said, my voice clear and cold, carrying in the city air. "Clara is your mother. Go to her." "I don't want her," David shrieked, his face crumbling. No sooner had the words left his mouth than Leo rushed forward, his body trembling with a volatile mix of shame and fury. He looked me up and down, taking in my appearance, my demeanor, and his eyes narrowed with a dawning, horrific understanding. "You're here then," he managed, his voice a ragged scrape. "What about home?" "Your mother," I said flatly. "I dumped her at the nursing home. She's probably dead by now." His bloodshot eyes bulged. He seized my shoulders, his grip painfully tight. "I didn't mean that. What about the things at home? The map? What about the map?" He was shaking me, his desperation a physical force. All of his conviction, his last shred of hope, was tied to that hidden treasure. I shoved him away without mercy, my strength surprising both of us. "What things could there be?" I asked coldly, feigning ignorance. "The new faction took everything of value when they came through after you fled. There was nothing left." The lie was my final revenge for the beating that had cost me my eye. All of Leo's remaining strength seemed to leave him at once. The belief that had sustained him through the harsh city life, that when it was all over he could return, hand over the map and be rewarded, collapsed. He dropped heavily to the grimy pavement, a broken man sitting in the filth of the city. Behind me I heard a familiar, steady voice. "Anya, is everything all right?" Daniel had arrived. He stood beside me, his posture protective, his gaze fixed on the pathetic scene before us. I turned and walked to his side, slipping my hand into his. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. David stared, his small body beginning to tremble violently. The final piece of his world shattered. He had lost his one constant, and now he saw her chosen replacement. "You," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Daniel. "You betrayed me and Dad. You're with someone else. You betrayed us." I gave him a faint, cold smile. "I never promised to be loyal to you, David." His little fists clenched tight at his sides. The child who had once held such power over me was now just a lost, angry boy. "Mom," he tried again, a last, desperate bargain. "I can accept this man. Just promise to treat me like before." At that, I slowly walked to him, crouched down so we were eye level, and curved my lips into a mocking smile. "Good boy," I said, my voice a soft, cruel whisper meant only for him. "I'll have children of my own. And you'll only ever be an unwanted bastard." As his frail body shook harder and harder, as the full weight of his abandonment crashed down upon him, I turned away without a backward glance. I walked away with Daniel, leaving my past rotting in the mud of the city street where it belonged. The encounter outside the university gates left a bitter taste, not of regret but of finality. Seeing Leo broken on the pavement and David's world shattered had been the closing chapter of a book I had long since stopped reading. I had a new life to live. Daniel, bless him, asked no prying questions. He simply squeezed my hand tighter as we walked away, his silent support a fortress around me. "The past has a way of showing up uninvited," he said finally, his voice calm. "But it doesn't have to be let in." He was right. I focused on my studies, on the fascinating complexities of economics, on building a future with this good, steady man. We talked about marriage, about a family of our own, one built on respect and shared dreams, not lies and servitude. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Vance family continued their slow-motion collapse. Leo, with his last hope extinguished, was a ghost. The map was gone, his mother was likely dead, his reputation in tatters. He managed to find grueling manual labor on a construction site, but his heart wasn't in it. The ambition that had once defined him had curdled into a thick, toxic resentment. Back in Oakhaven, the political winds had shifted decisively. The new faction was thoroughly purged, and investigations began into those who had collaborated with them. A party official, remembering the model filial son, who had so disgusted Director Chen, found Leo's name on a list. The fact that he had fled just before the faction's arrival was seen not as prudence, but as cowardice, or worse, complicity. Accusations were swift. He was labeled a traitor who had served the faction's interests. His explanations about caring for his sick mother fell on deaf ears. The nursing home matron, when questioned, confirmed Anya had brought Helena in, stating her son had fled. No one bothered to find me for further details. Leo's own actions, his desperate lie to save his career that had started this whole chain of events, had now sealed his fate. He was arrested one morning on his way to the construction site, taken not with a fight, but with a numb, vacant stare. He was thrown into a crowded prison, a world of brutality where his educated heirs made him a target. The beatings and bullying were constant, a relentless erosion of body and mind. The man who had always believed himself superior, destined for greatness, was slowly being ground into nothingness. Clara, terrified out of her wits, saw the arrest as the final nail in her coffin. The dream of a refined life in the city with a promising husband was now a nightmare of poverty and disgrace. That very night, while Leo sat in a cold cell, she packed her few belongings and the meager savings they had scraped together. She looked at David, who was watching her with wide, fearful eyes, and then at her own son, the baby whose existence had been the catalyst for all of this. She made a choice. When David woke the next morning, the small room was emptier. Claire was gone. So was her son. And so was the money. She had abandoned him, leaving him alone in the sparse rented room with nothing but a note scrawled on a piece of paper. "I can't do this anymore." David, at 11 years old, was completely and utterly alone. His first instinct, born of a deep childish desperation, was to find me. He remembered the name of my university. It took him 2 days, begging for food and sleeping in doorways, but he found the gates. He sat there day after day, a small, grubby fixture of misery, watching the students come and go. Finally he saw me. I was walking with Daniel, laughing at something he'd said, a stack of books in my arms. He ran to me, clutching at my clothes, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "Mom," he sobbed, the word a broken plea. "Open the door. I don't want Clara to be my mother. Only you are the one who loves me the most." He was regurgitating the script from his childhood, believing that if he just said the right words, the old Anya would reappear. He was a child trying to summon a ghost. I stopped, looking down at him. Daniel stood silently beside me, allowing me to handle this. "David," I said, my voice devoid of the warmth he craved. "You have no mother here. You need to leave." "I have nowhere to go," he wailed, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "She left me. Dad's gone. Please, Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." He was. I could see it. He was sorry for every complaint, every tantrum, every time he had chosen Clara over me. But his regret was born of consequence, not genuine understanding. He was sorry he was hungry and cold, not sorry for the person he had helped them make me become. "I can't help you," I said, the words final and absolute. "Go to the authorities. They will put you in a home." His face crumpled. He sank to the ground at my feet, crying great, heaving sobs that shook his small frame. He cried until he was hoarse, calling for a mother who no longer existed. I stepped around him. Daniel and I walked through the university gates, and I did not look back. I heard his cries for a long time, a fading echo of a life I had left behind. But I kept walking. He sat there until nightfall, until a university security guard, taking pity on him, gave him a piece of bread and told him to move on. After that, David disappeared from my doorstep. He drifted into the underbelly of the city, a tiny, forgotten soul in a vast, uncaring world. The next time I saw him months later, I was holding my daughter's hand. We were walking to the park, my belly swollen with our second child. Daniel was waiting for us there. As we passed a narrow alley, a grimy hand shot out, clutching at my coat. I looked down. It was David, but barely recognizable. His clothes were rags, his hair matted, and his eyes held a vacant, unhinged light. He had been begging. He opened his mouth, his chapped lips forming the word "Mom," but then he stopped. He stared at my daughter, at my pregnant belly, at the clean, warm clothes we wore. He shook his head, a slow, jerky motion. You're not my mom," he muttered, his voice a dry rustle. He let go of my coat and shuffled backward. "My mom is the one who loves me the most, loves me best." He repeated it again and again, a mantra against the unbearable truth. "Loves me the most, loves me best." He turned and stumbled back into the shadows of the alley, his mind having finally broken under the weight of his abandonment. He had gone mad. And Leo, locked in his prison, fared no better. The constant brutality, the loss of everything he had built his identity upon, was too much for his fragile ego to bear. He retreated inward into a world of delusion where he was still the respected teacher, the filial son, the man destined for promotion. He would spend his days muttering to himself about lesson plans and inspection teams, oblivious to the filth and violence around him. He too had lost his mind. In this life, it was they who had rotted in the mud. Leo, the ambitious manipulator, was a broken lunatic in a prison cell. Clara, the refined pianist, was a fugitive with a stolen child and a stolen future. David, the cherished son, was a mad beggar on the streets, forever calling for a ghost. Their tragedy was no longer my concern. It was simply the natural consequence of the seeds they had sown. As I watched my daughter chase a butterfly in the park, her laughter like bells on the clean city air, I felt the last of the old chains fall away. The past was dead. I had finally truly won. 10 years bloomed like a flower in the space where my old life had withered and died. The city was no longer just a refuge. It was my home, a place I had shaped and which had, in turn, shaped me. I graduated at the top of my class, the ghost of a burned admission letter forever laid to rest. Daniel, beaming with a pride that was as much his as it was mine, held my hand throughout the ceremony. We married in a simple, joyful service surrounded by friends from the university and the hospital. It was a world away from the miserable transaction my first marriage had been. We built a life not on lies and obligation, but on a foundation of mutual respect and deep, abiding love. My degree in economics, a field I had come to adore for its clear logic and potential for building better systems, opened doors I had never dreamed of. I started as an analyst for a small but growing import-export company. My unique perspective, honed by a life of hardship and a relentless drive to understand the undercurrents of power and resource allocation, quickly set me apart. Within 5 years I was leading my own team. Within 8 I was a partner. We bought a small house with a garden. It was there we raised our children. Our daughter, Liane, was a bright, curious child with Daniel's thoughtful eyes. Our son Kai, born 2 years later, was all boundless energy and infectious laughter. I cherished every moment with them, the messy, joyful, exhausting reality of motherhood I had been denied in my first life. I was present. I was patient. I was loved, and I loved them with a ferocity that was pure and untainted by regret. I never spoke of Oakhaven to them. It was a folk tale from a dark time, a story with no bearing on the world we were building. Daniel knew the broad strokes, enough to understand the shadows that sometimes crossed my face when a certain smell or tone of voice triggered a memory. He never pressed, his silent support a constant anchor. One Saturday we took the children to the city's large central park. Liane, now 7, was trying to teach her little brother how to fly a kite. Daniel and I sat on a bench watching them, our fingers intertwined. The sun was warm, the air clean. It was a perfect snapshot of the life I had fought so hard to claim. And then I saw her. Clara. She was sitting on a bench some distance away, her posture slumped. Time had not been kind. The elegance was gone, eroded by hardship. Her hands, those precious pianist hands, were rough and red. She was watching a sullen-looking boy of about 9 or 10, her son Mark, kick listlessly at the gravel. They both wore the shabby, worn-out look of those clinging to the very bottom rung of the city. Our eyes met across the lawn. There was no panic in her gaze this time, only a hollow, weary recognition. She saw my clean clothes, my well-fed children, the easy affection between me and my husband. She saw the life she had plotted and schemed for, the life she believed she deserved, lived out by the woman she had considered her inferior. She looked away first, her shoulders hunching further. She said something sharp to her son, and they both stood and shuffled away, swallowed by the crowd. There was no confrontation, no shouted accusations. Just the silent, crushing weight of her own failure. I felt a flicker of something, not pity but a distant, clinical understanding of the karmic balance of the universe. She had chosen her path, and it had led her here, to a park bench and a life of quiet desperation. I turned back to my family, the image of her fading from my mind as quickly as it had appeared. She was a footnote. Later that year, our official letter arrived from Oakhaven. It was addressed to me, care of the university alumni office. It informed me that the village was clearing old records and had found a document in the former Vance property, hidden behind a loose brick in the well. It was a deed, a legitimate one, to a small parcel of woodland on the edge of the village, left to me by a distant aunt on my mother's side. A fact Leo had discovered and hidden from me, intending to claim it for himself once the political climate settled. The map everyone had fought and died for was a red herring. This deed, this small piece of land, was the true overlooked treasure. I showed the letter to Daniel. He smiled. "What do you want to do with it?" "Sell it," I said without hesitation. "Use the money to start a scholarship fund for women from rural areas who want to study economics." He pulled me into a hug. A perfect legacy. The sale went through smoothly. The Anya Reid Scholarship for Women in Economics was established at my alma mater. Felt like the final, perfect act of reclamation. The land that had been hidden from me would now help other women find their own paths to independence. My life was full, purposeful, and happy. I had a career I loved, a family that was my heart, and a small but meaningful legacy that would outlive me. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer ached. They were simply reminders of how far I had come. One evening, I was working late in my home office, reviewing financial reports. Daniel brought me a cup of tea and kissed the top of my head. "Leanne has a science project on ecosystems," he said. She was asking about different types of environments. I told her about forests, rivers, and villages. I looked up at him. He wasn't pushing, just stating a fact. I smiled. "Villages can have very complex economies," I said, tapping my report. "But for a 7-year-old, maybe we should start with a book about ponds." He laughed, understanding. The past was a country I had no desire to revisit, even in conversation. It held no power over me anymore. I was Anya Reid. Wife, mother, businesswoman, benefactor. I was no one's beast of burden. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the foundation I had built was unshakable. The story of Anya Vance was a closed book, gathering dust on a forgotten shelf. My story, the real one, was still being written, and every chapter was a testament to the power of a second chance. Another decade turned, its passage marked not by struggle but by quiet, fulfilling milestones. Leanne, our bright-eyed daughter, developed a passion for biology that mirrored Daniel's methodical love for medicine. Kai, our energetic son, surprised us all by revealing an artist's soul, his hands more skilled with a charcoal pencil than a football. Our home was filled with the evidence of a life well lived. Leanne's science fair trophies stood beside Kai's framed sketches, and the walls echoed with debates about art and science that were as lively as they were loving. The Anya Reid Scholarship had already supported its first 3 recipients. One was now a policy analyst, another a data scientist for a nonprofit. Receiving their letters of thanks was a profound joy, a deep, resonant satisfaction that eclipsed any fleeting triumph over my old enemies. This was my revenge, a legacy of hope built from the ashes of a stolen inheritance. I had long since stopped looking for ghosts in crowds. The past was a distant, foggy landscape. Leo, Clara, David. They were phantoms who had no place in the vibrant reality I inhabited. I assumed their stories had ended in the misery I had last witnessed. I was wrong. It was a crisp autumn afternoon. Daniel and I were visiting a new modern art museum, a gift to ourselves for our anniversary. Kai, now a lanky teenager, was leading the way, eagerly explaining the concepts behind the abstract installations. Leanne was teasing him good-naturedly, her arm linked with her father's. We turned a corner into a large, white-walled gallery. And there, standing before a massive, chaotic canvas of red and black strokes, was a man. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes neat but threadbare. He was muttering to himself, his head tilted, his eyes fixed on the painting with an unnerving intensity. Something about the slope of his shoulders, the way he held his hands, was eerily familiar. My steps slowed. As we drew closer, I heard his words, a low, continuous stream. "See, the composition is all wrong. No discipline. The students must learn discipline. The inspection is next week. The forms must be in order." Then he turned, and his gaze, clouded and unfocused, swept over our family. Passed over Daniel, over Leanne, over Kai, and then landed on me. For a single heart-stopping moment, the fog in his eyes seemed to part. It was Leo. But it wasn't. The ambition, the cunning, the arrogant certainty. All of it was gone, scoured away by years in an institution and a mind that had broken under the strain. He looked ancient, hollowed out. Recognition flickered in his shattered gaze. Not of me as a person but as a symbol from his delusion. "Anya," he mumbled, his voice raspy from disuse. "The lesson plans. Have you finished the lesson plans?" The director is coming. He took a shuffling step toward me, his hand twitching as if to grasp a pointer that wasn't there. Daniel moved subtly in front of me, a protective barrier. Leo didn't seem to notice. He was already losing the thread, his eyes drifting back to the violent reds of the painting. The blood. Too much blood in the fields. The harvest will fail. He whispered before turning and shuffling away, back into his private world of bureaucratic nightmares and long-dead inspections. We stood in silence for a moment. Kai looked puzzled. "Who was that, Mom?" "Nobody, sweetheart," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "Just a lost man." We continued through the gallery, but the encounter had cast a slight shadow. It was Daniel who broke the quiet later as we walked back to our car. "He was in a state-funded care facility for a while," he said quietly, having made some discreet inquiries through his medical contacts after we'd last seen David. "He was released years ago. They said he was harmless, just lost in time. I didn't know he was here." "It doesn't matter," I said, and I meant it. Seeing him had been like seeing an exhibit in a museum. A tragic one, but one behind thick soundproof glass. It invoked a distant sadness for the waste of a human life, but no fear, no anger, no regret. A week later I was walking back from the market, a basket of fresh produce on my arm. My route took me past a small, grimy square where the city's forgotten often gathered. A commotion caught my attention. A young police officer was trying to coax a disheveled man out of a fountain. "Come on, old fellow," the officer was saying, his voice patient. "You can't sleep here." The man was mumbling, rocking back and forth. "Loves me the most, loves me best. She's coming back with the food, she always comes back." My blood ran cold. It was David. He was a man now, but the years on the street had carved him into a spectral figure. His hair was a matted nest, his face lined with dirt and premature age. The vacant, unhinged light in his eyes was brighter, more fixed. He looked up and his gaze for a split second seemed to clear as it locked onto me. A spark of something, memory, hope, accusation, flared. "Mom?" he croaked, the word a dry leaf scraping on stone. The young officer looked at me, a question in his eyes. I saw a flicker of hope in David's face, a desperate, childlike plea. But I was not his mother. I was a stranger carrying groceries, a woman with a family waiting for her at home. I gave the officer a small, polite shake of my head, a silent communication that said, "I don't know him." I adjusted the basket on my arm and walked on, my steps firm and sure. I heard him behind me, his voice rising into a wail. "She loves me best. She's the one. She's coming back." His cries followed me, but they grew fainter with every step, until they were swallowed by the city's hum. I did not look back. There was nothing for me there. That night as I tucked Kai into bed, he looked up at me, his young face serious. "Mom, that man today, the one in the museum. He seemed really sad." "He was sick, Kai," I said softly, smoothing his hair. "Sometimes people's minds get sick just like their bodies can." "Will he get better?" "Probably not," I said, honest but gentle. "But he's not in pain anymore. He's living in a world that makes sense to him." Kai thought about this, then nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Hey, good night, Mom. I love you. I love you too, my darling. More than anything." As I closed his door, I felt a profound sense of peace. The circle was finally, completely closed. Leo was a ghost haunting his own memories. David was a lost boy forever waiting for a ghost. Their suffering was real, but it was not my burden to carry. I had carried it for a lifetime already. I walked into the living room where Daniel and Lien were working on a puzzle. The scene, the focused quiet, the shared purpose, the love that filled the room, was my truth. It was my victory. I had not just escaped my past. I had transcended it. I had built a world where my children understood compassion but were shielded from cruelty, where my love was given freely and returned tenfold. The story of Anya Vance was not a tragedy that haunted me. It was a prelude to the story of Anya Reed, a story of resilience, of love, and of a hard-won, beautiful peace. And that was a story with no end in sight. The end.